Good afternoon. This is Nancy Schick of Third Ear Conflict Resolution, and it is the third Thursday of the month. And in approximately 10 seconds, it will be 3 o'clock Eastern. Every month at 3 p.m. on the third Thursday, we do what I call Third Ear Thursday, this live webinar where we talk about various workplace disputes and how to resolve them. Last month, we started a conversation about me, you, and we. And I thought it was perfect to bring Jeanette Seibly in on this part of the conversation to carry that forward because we are really talking about what I talk about all the time, which is building employment as a partnership. Jeanette, why don't you introduce yourself and we'll just go. We are going to have a conversation a little bit more than presenting. Let's talk.
Oh, I love that. And I love talking with you. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm Jeanette Seibly. I'm out of Denver, Colorado. And the weather right here is kind of cold today. I'm a talent advisor, leadership results coach, and have been for over 32 years. I also have a lot of corporate experience and also assessments. I love the difference when you use the right assessment, the ahas, people just light up. But it also helps people when it comes to coaching, managing, and hiring their people and being effective and getting the results they need. Too often, somewhere along the line, we forgot that results are important. Results could be just keeping clients or having them feel like, yes, you heard me and yes, you delivered. It
Yeah.
can be that simple, but it's not always as simple when you are hiring the wrong people.
It's interesting that you said that about we forget that we're really trying to achieve certain results. What we're talking about is effective employment partnerships. I started using this as a demonstration of how we should be thinking about coming together because employer and employee are both getting something from the relationship, ideally.
You're so right.
We're going to talk today about something we've already led into why employment partnerships matter. Then, how do you align goals? And when we're talking about aligning goals, we're talking about the business goal and the employee goal, but also recognizing if you're in what I call the sandwich generation in business, which is the manager, you're having to be the go between. In a lot of ways, you're doing a job similar to mine where you're trying to reconcile different interests and have people come together. I highly respect that you have a tough job. And I know that's one of the reasons, Jeanette, that you work in that particular space. That's probably one of the tougher jobs in any organization.
A lot of them are getting a very bad rap. Some of it's deserved, but a lot of it is not.
Yeah. Then we're going to talk a little bit about something you already mentioned, the assessments. I'm certified with a particular assessment and you use a different one. I use it more as opening a conversation. So we'll talk about how to use assessments, how not to use assessments, and that's where the legal head will come in as well. You want to be very careful not to box people in and label them and forget that
Right.
humans are always growing and changing. We're always saying the one thing that'll make a difference is communication, but we're talking about a strategic communication that's still authentic and still communicates what you need to, finding ways to reach each other. That's where the assessments also come in. We've got still a lot of recovery from the pandemic. And I'm still seeing a lot of movement around the country with employers having remote employees move. For example, you might not realize it until it comes time to file a certain form like a W 2. That might be your first indication when it goes to the wrong address that your employee moved during the year and forgot to tell you. That may have some consequences. Lawyers, when they hear partnership, they immediately think, oh my God, I'm not giving my employees part of my business. We're not talking about that kind of partnership. The way I see partnership, it is something that's mutually beneficial. If you start seeing the world that way, it changes your relationships. That's where we get past those abusive relationships. We've recognized them and we either transform them or we remove them from our lives so that we're not spending too much time and energy there. And that's whether you're the employer or the employee. So, Jeanette, I want to hear from you about creating employment partnerships.
I think a lot of things that have happened since the pandemic comes back to the type of people we're hiring, but also our leadership and our bosses. One of the issues that has come about that to me is just mind boggling is there's a lot of people today that are saying no to leadership and boss positions. I think it's kind of scary, to be honest, because we're not providing the current leadership, let alone future leadership, with the communication skills, the financial skills. A lot of them do have the technical skills, but they don't have the emotional intelligence or the social skills. So when you get into daily work experience or the impact on productivity or the growth potential, we stymie ourselves, we hurt ourselves because we're not being a partnership with not only our employees, but also the boss, also our clients, also the community in which we live in, the industry in which we operate in. And I think that's really, really critical.
We remember that some people are human, but we dehumanize others. I saw this play out with a business locally where they moved into a community that was diverse in religion, race, gender identity, economic status. Then they started alienating certain people within those communities and wondered why their business didn't go well. It's a perfect example of what you're talking about. We forget the human element of it. I've unfortunately dissolved many a business for
Yeah.
clients that had all the potential but did not have the leadership. This born leader thing, that is a myth. You
Yes.
have to train your leaders. I looked like I was a smart kid, for example, in elementary school. It's because my sisters made me do homework. When they were off for the summer and they had to babysit me, they made me sit in a desk and do homework. I got a head start. I come out of the womb that way, and no leader does, right?
Right. We forget that we have a culture. And when we hire people, we forget one person can really shift that culture. It might be really minuscule at the moment, but it can actually start to bloom, and not necessarily in a good way. I ran into one last week where feedback is verboten. They do not appreciate feedback. And I thought, how sad is that? That's how you grow. That's how you develop. That's how you form partnerships. We can all learn. We don't take the time to do an ethical or a real job of hiring the right people for the right job. And hence my book, Hire Amazing Employees. It's a step-by-step guide. This is my third edition, so I'm probably not as objective. But my point is there's a lot of things that we can do, and it's important that we learn how to do it. I actually had somebody tell me where she had asked somebody they were interviewing, "What's your favorite movie?" And the guy responded, "Jaws." She ushered him out of there so fast they didn't know what was going on. I asked him why. And she said, "Because he's an angry guy." I said, "Where'd you get that from?" From a
Got it.
It was the first movie that was actually filmed on the ocean. She didn't ask him why he liked that movie. That's how we get ourselves off in the weeds. And then when we try to form partnerships, it's kind of hard to do that because there's no authenticity there. There's no transparency there.
There's also a lot of times a lack of awareness, which is part of what we covered in last month's webinar. You have to first understand who you are in your business, right? And recognize how that shows up in creating your culture. To point back to the DEI space, a lot of people had what they thought were good intentions, but they hadn't really thought about their commitment to DEI, what that meant for their workplace. They tried to resolve historical inequities that occurred before they were even born. And I said, look at the ones in your workplace that your employees are telling you about. That's not always where people want to look. We have to recognize that culture is not just what you think and what you're trying to create.
Exactly.
It's really what your employees tell you they're experiencing, or your clients, your customers, etc. There are organizations, and I think we've all been in them, where even if there's an open door policy written in the employee handbook, you know that you're not supposed to actually use that.
I call it mischief. There's a lot of mischief like that out there in companies today. They say one thing, they do another, and the client expects something totally different. And again, that's not a partnership.
Right, right.
That's a
And
culture that doesn't work.
Mark, you brought up something in the comments, how difficult it is to maintain that partnership when you're laying people off. The reality is, letting someone go is a difficult experience for everybody involved. I've written about that. You can go on my website and even find the post I did a few months ago about that. Let's face it, if you're laying people off, no matter how much you can blame it on the pandemic or a loss of federal funding or whatever, the reality is, as a business owner, if you didn't set yourself up with some wiggle room, it is still partially your fault. You're delivering the news and you just want to get this over with. It's already difficult, it's already uncomfortable. There is a better way to do it, right? There is definitely a better way to do it, even if you don't have, for example, money to pay severance. Severance is not mandatory in most places unless there's some sort of contract that gives you that.
Or policy.
This is
Right.
where the mediation and negotiation skills come in. Maybe you don't have a lot that you can offer financially, but we're not just looking at monetary value. It's also time and energy. Sometimes helping someone make a transition under those difficult circumstances is one of the kindest and most wonderful things you can do.
It
Yes,
is.
the money would be nice because they don't know if they're going to be able to pay their bills. And a lot of people live paycheck to paycheck, but you don't necessarily have that obligation to fix that end of their life either. You only are in this from a partnership standpoint of, you had a job, you were working together towards some goals. Now you can't
Yeah.
help make that transition as comfortable as possible and treat each other with respect. I have done this myself with employees where I've actually terminated them because they weren't performing well. One of them specifically said to me, "I know I'm not doing the best job I can. I really don't like the work, but I like working for you." You laughed about it, you know that's not gonna work long term, so let's talk about how we're going to, in the spirit of partnership, transform our partnership to where we no longer work together, but we still wish each other well. If you like me, I like you, that doesn't necessarily mean we should work together.
Exactly. You win, I win, the business wins, the clients win, the product service wins, the community wins. We want to help people out by giving them a job, but are you really helping them out? And I call that job fit. A lot of people just do not fit their jobs today.
So many jobs have changed in dramatic ways, and they're going to continue to change. AI is going to continue to change jobs so quickly and so dramatically that employers are going to have to be thinking about what their jobs are going to look like before they start hiring for them. A lot of times, employers hire way after they needed the help, and I've done that too. I'm guilty.
Or they hire without taking the time to really look at what they really need.
Right.
They've got Joe who left, so we're going to bring Sally over. She can do the job. We assume a lot of stuff, but we don't assess for job fit. And I think that is critical here. It is critical. We're talking 80% of people in today's workplace do not fit the job. And that's sad. It's very sad because we're expecting them to be a partner in keeping clients happy and keeping the teams effective and productive. Yet, if they're not in the right job or they don't feel that they have the resources and tools to do that, then guess what? It's not a good partnership.
Right. You just gave me some amazing insight that I hadn't really thought about before. It explains a lot about why employers have a hard time distinguishing between, for example, employee and independent contractor. I want you to explain a little bit about how you work with employers to find good job fit.
Contrary to popular opinion, is not all assessments are created equally, legally, or scientifically. And the Department of Labor has guidelines available on what does work for pre-employment and promotion purposes. A lot of us create a lot of mischief when we use what's called a 4 quadrant. They were not designed for pre-employment purposes. To have a qualified assessment, you need to have reliability. Validity. Are you measuring what you purport to measure? Predictive validity. There are assessments out there that have a predictive validity of 5 years. If you're not using the appropriate tools, if you're relying real heavily on a resume where 80% of the time you have inaccuracies, or you're relying on interviews instead of due diligence, we hire for subjective reasons, but then we fire for poor job fit.
Right.
Define with clarity what you need, have an honest self-assessment of what it is you really need and want in this person. And then are you using objective criteria? Most employers are not. There's already this disconnect on a true partnership.
And I can tell you as an employment attorney that you're hitting a lot of what I see. It's not that people are necessarily terrible people. It's usually that there was miscommunication all the way along. It started with the employer not having a clear idea of what they were hiring for. I understand that. As a small employer myself, I like to reserve the and any other duties assigned. But I also know that I have a responsibility to figure out if those other duties as assigned are actually in the wheelhouse of the employee. And I've learned the hard way. I've been around for 23 years now, so I've made my share of mistakes. And before I became a lawyer, I worked in operations and I worked for other people. What I see now is it starts there where the employer is just looking for kind of a warm body or hired out of sympathy. Somebody I knew lost their job. I needed help with something, so I hired them. I've written about that as well. Sympathy is not a good basis for hiring. In this conversation of partnership, if I'm thinking I'm giving you something, I'm already seeing I have this and you're down here. You owe me.
It doesn't fit the win-win-win. You've taken the person out of the employment arena to find a job where they would be a good fit, where they would feel good about going to the job each day, where they would feel proud, like, look what I achieved.
That particular employee, for example, that I had the conversation and we offboarded her, she went on to do what she loves. Every time I see
Yeah.
her doing what she loves, it makes my heart full, and vice versa. She sees me doing what I love, we're getting things done, and that wouldn't have happened if we had destroyed each other by holding on, just like any other relationship you hold on to that needs to move.
Did you
So
see the question about the probationary period?
I do. You wanna take it or would you like me to take
Well,
it?
I think we can both take it because
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily a proponent of it. To me, it's kind of like, okay, we're going to just test you out here because our hiring system really doesn't work.
I think it also sends a negative message. The other thing that I remind people on both sides, whether you're an employer or an employee, you're always on a probationary period. What you need to do is just be honest with yourselves and each other and look for fit because you're gonna spend a heck of a lot of time together.
I think it also lets us off the hook of really being focused on training and developing people. If we've done a good job of hiring, we know the strengths and weaknesses. Every strength has a weakness, every weakness has a strength. We know what they need to do to be coachable. There isn't all of a sudden a different person showing up for work.
I think that you mentioned that earlier about this 5-year type assessment. We forget that
People change, people can
people
change.
change, their life circumstances change. You can't expect to just hire somebody like they're a robot or a piece of machinery. And look, even your machinery, especially if you've invested the amount, if you have invested, for example, $60,000 in a piece of equipment, wouldn't you maintain that equipment, make sure you knew how to keep it in good repair, keep it working well? And yet we don't treat our employees that way. We
We
treat
don't.
our employees worse than we treat our machines.
Well, we do. And I would like to go back to your point because I've seen this happen way too often, particularly with people moving around the country. This is a true story where a woman did a really fabulous job. She was in sales, but how that sales job was defined was that people would call her, she'd process the sales. She had been there a long time. So, of course, people talked very nicely about her. She was a really nice person. She made it happen. Well, then she decided she wanted to move to be with her dad because he was going through dementia and to support her mom in that process. So she talked the employer into moving her to that state in sales. Well, guess what? She failed miserably because that real nice customer service, real helpful kind of attitude, that's what made her a success, didn't work out there networking, asking for presentations, closing the sale. Those are not skills she had. Plus, there's a difference between the Southwest and the Southeast. Again, we're talking culturally. And I think we're going to start hearing more and more about that, where people moved from Michigan to Colorado. True story for me. There is a difference in culture. You could move from Detroit up to Grand Rapids in Michigan, and it's going to be a different culture. A lot of times we just don't take that into account. And so as a result, we're not forming or maintaining a good partnership.
Yeah, it brings us right into the communication practices. Anytime you move, even if you're just moving to a different business across town, there's going to be a different culture. You need to learn what that is. And it doesn't mean that cultures aren't going to be continuing to change too. That's where the communication is so key. You said something earlier that I want you to repeat that I think is super relevant here. People hire for subjective reasons and fire for more objective reasons like performance, right?
Or job fit. Yeah.
Yeah, for poor job fit. I saw that in your newsletter when it went out today, and I thought, what a wonderful way of putting that because that is it. We end up ultimately making those decisions based on our gut. That's where matrices come in. Try to make things as objective as possible. And even in communication, I do that, right? Like when I'm mediating, I say, let's get down to what is the disagreement? Jeanette and I disagree about X, not Jeanette's a bad person and I'm a great person. It's what do we disagree about? And maybe we disagree about who's good and who's bad. That's fine too. Let's dig into that, right? But I try to get into like something that's pretty succinct. And
Oh my goodness, my
uh-oh.
apologies. To go back to your point though, a lot of times we focus on managing for somebody's personality. We're not managing for the results. And I think we expect people to change. They can, but they don't change dramatically. You're not going to take an introvert and make them an extrovert or take a high sociable person and make them a super good listener. Can they improve their listening skills? Absolutely. But to the point where they're a great listener and you want them as a counselor, probably not. There's things like that that sometimes we have to get real about.
I
And
agree, without making people wrong about who they are too. I think that's the other part
yeah,
of it. A lot of times the employer then wants to put it back on the employee. And it's like, "No,
exactly.
no, you missed it in your assessments." And this is, again, in the spirit of partnership, you both did this, right?
Exactly. Reminds me of a client who years ago called me up and they've been using the assessment for years, the one that I rep, and he's considered the granddaddy of assessments. She called me up and said, this person is driving me nuts. He's creating mischief. He's creating problems with clients, et cetera, et cetera. I always start with the assessment. And I said, from the assessment perspective, he's the right person for the job from what you said. And she goes, well, he's doing all the stuff that's not part of his job description. And so that happens a lot of times in businesses where employees take on a little something extra here, a little something extra there, or because of a situation, they take on something outside of what they fit. But instead of it's a one off, it becomes part of their everyday job. That's where they get themselves in trouble. So I said to her, you have a choice here. You can either let him go, or you can work with him to help him become successful, which means you pull back into the job he's been hired to do and that we know he can do. He has proven himself. Help him to improve his communication skills. Too often, that's where you get brought in, Nancy, on mediating these kind of situations. If people learn to communicate, be more supportive of one another in a real objective manner, that would make a huge difference.
Exactly. I got into a conversation online over the weekend with a gentleman that talked about we want to acknowledge someone's lived experience and respect that they're unique, but we also have to remember that someone's lived experience is subjective. By pulling in objective criteria, like a job description, like key performance indicators, take some of that emotional component away so that you're both making really good decisions. And I will say, I do hold employers to higher standards for that because who knows what you need in your business or who should know better but you? And that's exactly
Exactly.
how the law is going to look at you. It doesn't mean the employees are off the hook. Employees, you need to be looking internally as well and understanding your own strengths. Jeanette and I both have resources for that. But if you're putting yourself in a situation, as a lot of employees do, just for the salary, and you're lying to get the salary, you're going to be found out. Some people do rise to the occasion, but you have to know that if you're going in with a deficit and you're kind of fudging a little bit to get up to a level for a promotion or a higher level of salary, then in your free time, be doing what you need to do to develop yourself professionally to meet that standard. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a termination on your record.
Yeah. Peter Drucker, management guru, said something to the effect of that we promote people to their level of incompetence.
Yeah.
This isn't something we don't know. We know better, yet we continue doing it. Then we act surprised that they can't do the job.
You promote someone to their level of incompetence, and then what do? You make them competent. You train them, you
If you
develop
can.
them. Even your employee who comes in, does their job quietly, and you barely have to even worry about them, even that employee needs to be developed. Good employers will have these professional development plans for all their employees. You will be able to identify who is management material. And management material is not just capacity currently, but who has the drive to develop what they need to. Most employers will tell you they hire for that more than anything. It's the attitude, it's the enthusiasm, the natural curiosity. I don't know how natural it is. I think we're all a little bit curious, but naturally curious about the work that you're doing. If they're naturally curious about something else, that's awesome, but maybe help them go find a job in that.
Absolutely. Partnership mindset, I think, is really, really critical. And it begins with you as the employer. It doesn't begin with them. If you've done a great job of asking the right job related questions, and then you're doing a fabulous job with the onboarding, the training and development, and continually giving them more according to who they are and what they're interested in, that to me is a great partnership.
You have to do that exploration, and respect is non-negotiable. That is not only your commitment to respecting the people that work for you, but using that as also a kind of a thermometer. The moment that you can no longer look at other people in your workplace, certain employees, as somebody you value, stop yourself. Maybe it is that you need to talk to somebody about what's going on. An exercise I often give people is in that moment that you're having a hard time humanizing and respecting that other person, I want you to write down 10 things you think that they contribute to your workforce. That starts to put you in a different conversation. If they are at the level of their incompetence, you can start to uncover it.
Yep.
Remember that this is a human being that deserves to be treated with respect, and you're not going to get it if you're not respecting them. It's a two-way conversation, which is again why we talk about partnership.
If you keep having those kind of thoughts and feelings, hire yourself a good executive coach, because sometimes we ourselves hit that ceiling and we're not going to get through it on our own. I've seen people that have gone from so employees, hire a good coach, go through that ceiling and actually become fabulous. It
It's a
takes
really
that
good.
commitment, it takes that partnership, it takes everybody being committed to each person's success.
I love that you brought that up. They're hitting their ceiling too. I am always growing. I'm always growing personally in order to meet the demands of the workplace. This is my call for anybody that's in a management situation right now. You consider having a coach so that you're not needing me as
Yeah.
a lawyer. There are plenty of them with different structures that you
Yeah.
maybe use them only when you're stuck. It's fine, right? It's better than staying stuck and making big mistakes.
I'll tell you a good story about the value of a coach. There was a business that hired me, and they didn't know if they should fire the guy or promote the guy. True story. I talked with him. I used the assessment. I said, no, he definitely has the capability. So I worked with him for 10 weeks, and guess what? He got promoted. He got promoted all because he had person who was 150% for his success. Here's what we focused on: communication, 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 communication. And I don't care how old you are, the common denominator that I focus on is communication.
We think that people are going to communicate the way that we do, and that communication is always going to land the way that we intended it. You have to remember that it's not just about you delivering it, it's you delivering it in a way that can be received. If it's not received, you didn't communicate. You just said something.
That's
And
a
what a
great
mic drop. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you found value in this. Reach out if we can help you because we're all growing and changing all the time. We're trying to form a new paradigm with business and
Yes.
workplaces. And we really do believe that that's possible. We've seen it. We're doing it every day. So the more that we can have people like you on board and spread that word and give you skills, the better it gets for all of us.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.